Hello, and welcome to The Interview, with me, Willie Lowry. I'm the Washington correspondent for The National, and in this series, we explore the relationship between the U.S. and the Middle East. With leading voices from both sides, we peel back the layers and get to the heart of what really drives American interests in the region. Our guest this episode is Morad Tahbaz, who spent nearly 6 years inside Iran's notorious Evin Prison, a political pawn whose rights were stripped and futures stolen. Tahbaz, an American and Iranian citizen, led Iran's leading conservation nonprofit, working to save the country's endangered wildlife. He was arrested in 2018 and eventually charged with espionage and sentenced to 10 years in prison. While detained, he turned to art as a way to escape. Morad, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Morad, we recently marked 1 year since you were released from prison. I want you to take us back to the moment you realized you were actually free.
It was September 18th when we boarded a plane to Doha, Qatar. That was the moment that I knew we were going to leave. There were a number of occasions where I thought I was leaving. Once with the British, but I was left behind in that episode. There were other times that there were deals that were ready to go, and I was going to be part of it, and then I got dropped during the previous administration, and 2 other Americans who were held hostage did come back at that episode. So it was always with a great deal of trepidation that you look upon, am I going to get out? Is this going to go through? And we spent 40 days in a hotel as a kind of transition period while they were working out the details of the deal to free us. You can imagine what goes through your head. Why are we waiting? What's going on? What went wrong again? And then early in the afternoon, it was rush. Let's get into the van. He drove to the Mehrabad airport, which is the internal airport for travel inside Iran, and it's very close. And literally just said hello to the Qatari ambassador, to the Swiss ambassador, and we all boarded a Qatari Airways plane, and we were off.
Did you hug the three of you? I mean, did you kind of silently weep? What was the kind of the reaction?
I think there was just a great sense of relief. And when we got to Doha and got off the plane, the 3 of us, there were 5 hostages, but the 3 of us, because we had been cellmates for a period of time too, we just kind of held each other and as we walked to the terminal, and a very good feeling, very good feeling.
It was a beautiful image, the 3 of you with your arms kind of draped over each other's shoulders, walking off. 6 years is an incredibly long time. Could you take me through some of what you experienced while in Evin? And I think the worst part was before you were actually put through, I guess, kind of the general detention area.
Initially, I was taken to the IRGC, or the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps prison, which is in Evin, but it's separate from all the rest of the prison. Really doesn't answer to judicial authorities or anything. It's a small, very secure area where, there are pretty intense interrogations and various forms of pressure and, if you want to call them, torture and so forth. That's carried out in there. I was in there for 2 years. And I think I spent a total of about 4 months in solitary confinement. I had a lot of medical issues there, but after the 4 months of solitary, then I got put in cells with members of ISIS and a wide variety of sometimes dangerous, sometimes not so dangerous people.
You mentioned that you had health challenges while you were in prison. I know that there was, I mean, on top of obviously the emotional trauma, there was some physical trauma as well. Could you talk to us a little bit about that?
I had a history of cancer myself. I had prostate cancer, I would say about 10, 12 years before I was arrested. And my post-operation care in the United States, the catheter that they had caused damage to my urethra. So I had to, and still have to, self-catheter every so often. And one of the most trying periods of time in prison was that they wouldn't give me a catheter. So I wasn't able to pass water. My bladder, got to the point it was just, ready to explode. And they wouldn't take me to see a doctor. And it finally got to the point that I became dysfunctional, and they took me to the emergency room. And this didn't happen just once. It happened a few different times. And during these periods, I mean, they would still take me in for interrogations and, swat me around a bit. And, occasionally get punched or stuff like that. But that was very, very trying, because, there were times that I got to a point that I just physically said, okay, I'm not going to make it. But you know what? I've had a good life. I've seen much of the world. I've had a great family. And it is what it is. And I could see the kind of writing on the wall that I'm not going to go out of here in one piece. A few months after that, they took me to the hospital and some more tests, and they misdiagnosed me with having cancer come back. I was given 3 or 4 sessions of chemotherapy, and just you can imagine, I'm lying in a bed. I've got a serum in my arm, and I have an interrogator come up to me and say, you know what, why don't you sign, I'll write this thing out, your confession, I'll write it out for you, you just sign it, and then we'll get you out, and away.
While you were there, they misdiagnosed you, so on top of everything, you thought you had cancer again.
Yes, it was worse than that. They had taken a scan and said you've got a tumor behind your eye, you've got a tumor on top of your pancreas, and one on your kidney. So I had biopsies, and of course there wasn't anything in there, but they were convinced that I had it. And they, at the IRGC hospital, they were going to do exploratory surgery to see that, which I said, I just forget it. I said, I'd rather die in prison than go under exploratory surgery. You can open up my head to see whether there's a tumor there. I was, I think, hospitalized maybe 10, 12 times. I was always in a room with 3 guards, armed guards, all the time inside the room, hospital room. At one juncture, I had to have an operation. I'd be chained to the bed, hand and foot. It was tough. The medical part, my tooth had broken. They wouldn't let me see a dentist. I think the first time I saw a dentist was, maybe 5 years, almost 5 years after I was in prison. From one of the physical punches that I was hit in the ear, I lost 50% of my hearing in one ear. But the test that was taken in the hospital of my hearing, the interrogator came and tear it up, wouldn't give it to my wife. It took a lot just to kind of hold myself together to get through that. It took an awful lot.
And on top of that, you're in a prison surrounded at times by members of ISIS, members of, as you were saying, really scary people, but also other people who maybe are in a similar situation who probably aren't handling it as
No, we had, there was a person not in my cell, but across from my cell, I don't know where they took him, but he was there for a number of nights, and he would be he would run and bang his head into the metal door all night. I mean, really bang it. I mean, I thought his head was cracked open by some time. You had other, people like screaming and having convulsions. One juncture, the upper floor of where we were being held by the IRGC was the area they detained women. There was one period of time I was in solitary, and every afternoon, this one woman would start bawling and crying, and one of the guards would be there, female guards would be there trying to calm her down. But I had to listen to that all afternoon, that she was kind of having a nervous breakdown and falling apart. So I mean, there are psychological things like that can wear you down. 6 months or so after I was originally detained, they upped the charges on us because the government of Iran had come out and claimed that we had not done anything and we were innocent. And this was in broad lettering on the official government newspaper. So the Revolutionary Guards doubled down, if you will. And it was a battle of wills and power. They asked for the death sentence, or with this kind of corruption on earth charge. We had that hanging over my head for almost 18 months until our trial. And the very last session of my trial, their charges were lessened to collaboration with an enemy state, and which of course condemned me to 10 years of prison. But those 2 years were the really, really difficult ones. And then in the public prison, you just have to manage yourself and how you do it and how you find interests and hobbies or whatever you can do to keep your sanity. And I started drawing. Then I started trying to understand Persian carpet weaving, which I always had an interest in. I didn't know anything about it. So I actually got some friends on the outside to send in a document to me about carpet weaving, to understand if I was going to design something for a carpet, the grid patterns, the knotting, and all of that. You needed to understand that. So once I understood that, I started designing carpets. I think I designed about 40 plus carpets. Then through various people in the art world, I found someone who could manage the weaving process, because these were meant to be tribal weaves, so they're not necessarily one group of weavers. I mean, they're all scattered all over northwestern Iran. So I would get the drawings out through my wife, and she would get them to this fellow. And then when I called my wife, she'd conference us together, and I would direct them on what the coloration should be in this. So we had all those carpets woven. We were able to send them all back. So they're all in Connecticut now.
All 40?
All 40, yeah. And they had, for example, it's a pretty small woodworking shop. So I knew a little about woodworking. I'd made a table or two in my life. And so I got to start fooling around with the wood, and slowly I took some of my designs, mostly of lions, which are culturally an important symbol in Iran, and started making lions out of wood pieces. Initially scrap wood, then as I got to know the individuals who ran the woodworking shop for the prison, I convinced them that they should import some wood for me. And we got a little better wood and a little more elaborate. Then there was one person who had been allowed to bring in an engraving machine, a little kind of handheld engraving machine and a microscope to engrave cornelian stones, which is very customary in the Middle East and they write prayers or things like that on the cornelian, and for rings mostly. But I learned from him how to carve or engrave on stones. So I took that up, and I don't know how many stones I engraved, but maybe 40, 50. But a lot of sketching between stuff during those last almost 4 years. But I kept myself very busy. I really didn't have too much spare time. And for me, that was critical, because my thoughts were, okay, I've got to finish this piece, or I've got to finish that drawing, and what do I want to do next? So I always had a program for myself, as opposed to thinking, when am I going to get out of here? Because I saw prisoners who kind of went down that dark hole of, when am I going to get out of here? And it's not pretty. It really is not pretty.
Yeah, I can only imagine that regiment kind of was instrumental. Prior to your time in Evin, what was your artistic background?
Not a whole lot, to be honest with you. I had always fooled around with sketches and occasional paintings, but it was, maybe once every couple of years type thing for me. My art was 95% always focused on wildlife. Well, that was my passion. That's what came to my mind always. And even when I was in solitary, I used to, there was absolutely nothing to do in there. No reading material, nothing. And the walls were stone walls, so I used to stare at the walls, and there were lots of little lines in the stones, and I would look for animal shapes within these lines, and I would count them and keep going back and see whether I could find more. And that was my daily challenge for the 4-month period of seeing wildlife in these stone walls. I think fairly shortly after I transferred to the public prison, I started sketching. Well, just photocopy paper and a pen. I mean, didn't have anything. And then, got to know my way around and be able to get some color pencils, and started kind of getting a little more elaborate.
And you've continued?
I have. I had some unfinished work. I had a lion head, kind of a brutalist style lion head, that was unfinished. That I've done drawings for the finished one, and I have a person who is a metal worker who's helping me make it out of steel, corten steel. And I made one of the other lions that I had done out of wood fully, and turned that around in brass. I wanted to keep the same methodology of these sculptures, how I made them in prison, as opposed to making a cast and doing it out of bronze. Because I had very limited amounts of wood and thicknesses and so forth. So what I would do is for say bulk, I would have to put pieces of these together. And the metal ones that I'm doing is I'm using the same methodology. They get a little heavy, but nevertheless, it's the same methodology. They're held together. The ones that I did in prison, most of them are held together by dowels, just a few dowels. You can take them all apart. And here we've devised ways of keeping the hardware hidden, but they can still all come apart. And it's something that I'll probably continue in that vein for some time. And I've made one more wooden mock-up since I've been back of a tiger. I call it the last Caspian tiger. It went extinct in Iran in the 1950s. And I've made that one out of wood. And then I'll get into the process of doing it out of metal. the sketches I had done in Evin. So I'm kind of coming to the end of my production cycle, if you will, from my prison work. And then we'll delve into some newer and probably art that is a little less regimented, if you will, or a little more fluid.
But it's helped you transition.
Tremendously. When you focus on these kinds of things, it takes your mind away from a lot of other ones. So it's allowed me not to go back in time and think of all the difficulties that was put through in prison, all the pain, suffering that my family had to endure, and it's very very therapeutic, very therapeutic. And I didn't think of it that way initially. It's just something that, I was able to grasp on to keep my sanity, if you will, and keep my mind busy.
If we could talk a little bit about the deal that ultimately freed you and Siamak Namazi and Imad Sharji. It saw the U.S. Unfreezing essentially $6 billion of Iranian funds that were held in a South Korean bank, giving them access to it for humanitarian purposes. Republicans were incredibly critical of it, essentially saying that the Biden administration shouldn't have done that, shouldn't have made the deal. What would you tell Republicans today?
First and foremost, I think one should always look at the humanitarian aspects of these situations. Yes, it's easy to criticize, especially when you're not in the shoes of the families or the people being held hostage, tortured, when their life's in danger. You're disconnected. So you can criticize, especially if you're from an opposing political party. It's very easy to do. Truth of it is a little more complex. You always will, with hostages, come down to the humanitarian aspect of it. And it's my belief that whenever there are opportunities to free Americans that have been detained illegally, unlawfully, for nothing other than bargaining, and if you can find the opportunity to scrabble together a deal that doesn't cost the American taxpayer anything, it should be done.
Iran is a major focal point of American foreign policy. Former President Trump has referenced it multiple times throughout the election campaign, essentially saying that the war in Israel, October 7th, wouldn't have happened if he were president, and he would essentially kind of send Iran back to the Stone Age, through his rhetoric and words. What do you make of his approach to Iran, and is it actually that much different than the Biden or Harris administration?
Firstly, it's not that different. Secondly, it's a far more complex situation. I think former President Trump is way oversimplifying. It is not a simple issue. Middle Eastern politics has been complicated for only God knows how long. But it's not a simple, we're going to go and take care of this. It's the case in point is like Iraq. They took care of Saddam Hussein, and what's happened since. And Iran right now, yes, you take out this regime, there's no viable alternative regimes out there. I spent time with every dissident group imprisoned because they all had representatives who were being held in Evin. And they don't have the mass, they don't have the capability, at least not that I've seen, to be able to come in and say, okay, we're going to take over and run the country. It's not that simple. Boasting about extending back into the Stone Age, there's a cost to it. You know, Iran is obviously an oil-producing area, the largest oil-producing area in the world, between Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Iran, Kuwait, all of these countries, and they're going to lash out at whatever they can, whether it be Israel, whether it be Saudi Aramco, whether it be, you know, the Kuwaiti oil fields. I mean, because they have limited tools on how to react. So it will create probably a big mess. And I think at the end of the day, no politician wants to get into another major war in the Middle East. And you know, there was an opportunity with the JCPOA when it was initially signed that was empowering the reformist elements of an otherwise not so nice regime. But the reformist elements were gaining the upper hand. When former President Trump annulled the United States participation in that JCPOA, the net effect was that we lost our ability to see what was going on in detail of the Iranian nuclear program. And on top of it, we empowered the right-wing fanatical elements within the Iranian regime. And we took a huge turn backwards, and the results are you're still seeing them today. And what's going on, all the extra arms going to the Houthis, to Hezbollah, to Hamas. I mean, it's all escalated since then.
You were essentially taken around that time frame.
I was taken around that time frame. But they had, in my interrogations, it was clear that they had anticipated with Trump's coming that he was going to back out of the deal. And they, you know, I mean, they were trying to get the upper hand even before he actually opted out of that JCPOA.
Do you blame him and a little bit for that?
It's hard to blame an individual, I think, in the method or the way the government operates in the United States. It's seldom one individual making a call. But I think trying to cater to one constituency versus another for their own political gain generally carries a huge cost. And I think they were kind of blind to what that cost would be.
Morad Tahbaz, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Will. Thank you for having me.